Hello from Mindset Daily, wishing you a day full of health, peace, and happiness. Thank you for watching the Mindset Daily channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support us. Thank you so much. What if the most dangerous kind of disrespect isn't loud, but quiet? What if you've been tolerating it so long, you've started to think it's normal? And what if recognizing it is the first step to reclaiming your worth? You can't fix what you refuse to see. And one of the greatest dangers in life isn't when someone disrespects you openly. It's when they do it quietly, consistently, and you begin to adapt to it. Over time, you don't even notice it's happening. Disrespect doesn't always arrive with yelling or insults. Sometimes it comes wrapped in polite phrases, forced laughter, and smiles that never quite reach the eyes. It shows up when someone cuts you off mid-sentence like your voice doesn't matter. It lingers in the silence after you've opened your heart, only to be met with apathy. It hides in the moments when your time, energy, and kindness are treated like afterthoughts, like you're optional. And if you're not paying close attention, you might start questioning yourself instead of the behavior. You may wonder, am I overreacting? Or tell yourself, maybe I'm just being too sensitive. Slowly, you start to shrink. You excuse what shouldn't be excused. You begin to accept what was never acceptable. But let me tell you clearly, this is not how it's supposed to be. You were not created to be an emotional dumping ground. You weren't put on this earth to constantly prove your worth to people who can't even recognize their own value. You were made to tiptoe around someone else's ego while yours slowly disappears. You need to start seeing the signs, not out of bitterness, not from a place of pride, but from a place of truth. When someone consistently downplays your voice, ignores your effort, mocks your dreams, or treats you like you're invisible, let's be clear, that is not love. That is not friendship, and it is certainly not respect. And it doesn't matter if you've known them for 10 years or 10 days. Disrespect is still disrespect. So what do you do when you finally open your eyes to the subtle ways you're being devalued? Let's talk about that next. In part 1, we talked about recognizing subtle disrespect, even when it hides behind politeness or long-standing relationships. Now, let's talk about what comes next, what you do with that awareness. Because no matter how close you are to someone, no matter what memories you've built or how much time you've shared, disrespect is still disrespect. It doesn't lose its weight just because it comes from someone familiar. If anything, it becomes even more dangerous when it's disguised as loyalty or hidden behind history. And here's something deeper. Confusion is a breeding ground for destruction. The enemy thrives in spaces where you feel unsure, unstable, and unseen. He wants you to doubt your worth. He wants you to stay in places where you're constantly questioning yourself. That's why you need to sharpen your spiritual vision. Ask God to reveal the truth, not just about who people pretend to be when they need something from you, but who they really are when you have nothing left to give. Sometimes we cling to people because we remember who they used to be. We hold on to the version of them that once loved us, supported us, or showed up when it mattered. But God is often trying to show us who they are now. And that version may no longer have the capacity to honor, uplift, or even respect you. And if they can't do that, it's time to open your eyes and accept what's in front of you. Recognizing these signs isn't about becoming bitter or hypercritical. It's about protecting the peace that God placed in your life. It's about honoring the body, the mind, and the spirit He entrusted you to care for. And please remember this. There's a big difference between humility and humiliation. Yes, God calls us to walk in humility, but that doesn't mean you should allow yourself to be mistreated. Jesus, in His love, washed the feet of others, but He never begged for their approval. He spoke with compassion, yet He walked away when hearts were hardened. He offered grace, but never chased after those determined to dishonor Him. So if the Son of God didn't lower Himself to gain human validation, why should you? Some of you have been overextending yourself for people who wouldn't even meet you halfway. People who wouldn't cross a room for you. yet you've crossed oceans for them. And deep down, you know it doesn't feel right. It feels one-sided. It feels exhausting. So what do you do when your heart knows the truth, but your loyalty keeps pulling you back? Let's talk about that in the next part. In part 2, we talked about the courage it takes to recognize when someone no longer honors your worth. But even after your eyes are opened, there's still a battle that happens inside. Between what you know and what you feel. That tightness in your chest, the tension in your stomach, that quiet ache that just won't go away. It's not just emotion. It's not drama. It's not overthinking. That uneasiness is the Holy Spirit gently nudging you. It's a divine warning, a quiet but persistent whisper saying, this is not where you belong. You don't belong in rooms where your presence feels like an inconvenience. You don't belong in conversations where your words are dismissed or drowned out. And you definitely don't belong in relationships where you have to constantly shrink yourself just to keep the peace. You were created with inherent value, not because of what you do or how well you perform, but simply because of who created you. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And that's not just a pretty phrase to hang on a wall. It's a divine truth. So the next time someone makes you feel small, makes you second guess your voice or your worth, remember this. God never intended for you to live small. But here's the hard part. Once you start recognizing the signs, resistance will come. The enemy won't just sit back and let you rise. He'll whisper things like, you're overreacting. He'll try to convince you that you're being too sensitive or dramatic. He'll use guilt and shame to keep you quiet. That's how toxic cycles stay alive, through silence, through doubt, through emotional confusion. But you weren't created to live in emotional poverty. You weren't called to stay stuck under the weight of someone else's inability to love you well. It takes strength to tell yourself the truth. It takes faith to admit that something or someone is no longer aligned with the purpose God placed on your life. And sometimes the most loving and holy thing you can do for yourself and even for them is to say, I see this clearly now and I won't accept it anymore. So, where do you go from here? Let's talk about what it looks like to set healthy, soul-guarding boundaries in the next part. In the last part, we talked about the courage it takes to say, I see this clearly now, and I won't accept it anymore. But recognition alone isn't enough. You must respond. You must protect what God has placed in you. Don't wait until your spirit is completely worn down to finally take a stand. Don't wait until your confidence is shattered and your voice has gone quiet. God is speaking now. He's gently, yet urgently saying, lift your head, open your eyes. I have something better for you. But in order to receive the better, you have to release what's broken. You must recognize what is no longer worthy of your time, your trust, or your heart. Disrespect isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself with harsh words or obvious insults. Often, it's quiet, subtle. You hear it in the silence after your truth is ignored. You feel it in the pit of your stomach, in that spiritual unease that tells you something's off. And when you feel it, don't dismiss it. Don't talk yourself out of what your spirit already knows. Because here's the hard truth. What you tolerate becomes what you teach others to repeat. Some people will try to drag you back into storms that God has already pulled you out of. They'll bait you with drama, trigger your emotions, press every one of your buttons, just to see if they still have access to your peace. But you have a choice. Don't trade your peace for their chaos. Because the moment you do, you hand them control. And God didn't bring you this far, didn't heal and shape you, just to see you lose your identity in someone else's confusion. The peace of God is not something you have to chase. It's not something you beg for. It's something you protect. He gives it freely, yes, but He won't force you to hold on to it. That's your job. That's your discipline. That's your boundary. So when someone tries to belittle you, provoke you, or shake your spirit, know this. They're not just attacking your feelings. They're trying to invade your atmosphere. And you must learn how to stand firm and say, not today. Not in my spirit, not in my space. So how do you maintain that boundary when it's tested, again and again? We'll dive into that in the next part. In the previous part, we talked about guarding your peace and not letting anyone disrupt the atmosphere God gave you. But let's be honest, that's easier said than done, especially when your emotions are triggered and everything in you wants to react. Because the truth is, when someone disrespects you, the most natural response is to clap back. You want to defend yourself. You want to prove a point. You want to say, they can't treat me like that. I'll show them. But let me ask you this. What do you actually lose when you give them the reaction they're baiting you for? You lose your focus. You lose your peace. You lose your clarity, and sometimes even your sense of purpose. And for what? To convince someone who already made up their mind about you that you're not weak, that you're strong, that you're in control. Let me tell you, that's not strength. That's distraction. That's the enemy pulling you out of alignment, luring you into a battle you were never meant to fight. Look at the example of Jesus. When he stood on trial, insulted by the very people he came to save, mocked, spat on, slandered, he didn't retaliate. And it wasn't because he lacked power. He could have spoken a single word and brought heaven's judgment down in an instant. But he stayed silent, not out of weakness, but out of purpose. He understood something we often forget. You don't have to respond to every insult when you know who you are. You don't have to fight every battle when you know your mission. And you don't have to prove anything to those who are determined to misunderstand you. That's not passive silence. That's holy discipline. And that's the kind of restraint we must learn, because not every battle is worth your breath, your sleep, or your peace. Some of the wars you're fighting right now, they aren't even yours. They're distractions sent to wear you down and slow your growth. You've been spending your energy trying to explain yourself to people who are never connected to your purpose. People who don't listen, don't change, and honestly, don't care. And the more time you spend chasing their approval, the longer you delay your own healing. So what happens when you finally release the weight of their opinions and choose peace over performance? That's what we'll explore in the next part. In the last part, we talked about how some battles are not yours to fight, and how choosing silence can often be the loudest expression of strength. Now let's go one layer deeper. What happens when you stop reacting to dysfunction altogether? Because here's the truth. You're not just tired. You're tired because you've been postponing your purpose. Instead of walking forward into what God has for you, you've been caught trying to fix something you didn't break. You're stuck spinning in circles, trying to repair wounds that were never yours to carry in the first place. Let me be clear. Their dysfunction is not your assignment. Just because someone else is operating in chaos doesn't mean you need to let that chaos into your spirit. Just because they're loud, messy, or triggered doesn't mean you need to match that energy. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to correct them, clap back, or match tone for tone. You don't have to play their emotional game. Why? Because your peace is too valuable. Your peace is sacred. It's holy. It's not just your comfort. It's your power. It's not weakness. It's your testimony. Peace doesn't mean everything is quiet around you. It means that God is steady within you, even when the world around you is trying to pull you apart. And when you operate from that place, people notice. They'll wonder why you didn't snap. They'll question why you didn't retaliate. They'll be confused by your calm when they try to break you with their chaos. And that's your moment. That's your witness. That's when you can say, it's not me holding me together. It's the grace of God guarding my heart. Yes, some people will mislabel you. They'll call you weak for walking away. They'll say you're cold because you went silent. Let them talk. Let them whisper. You don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing peace over pettiness. You don't have to get loud to prove your strength. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stay completely silent and let that silence speak for you. Because when you say nothing but still stand tall, that silence says, I refuse to be moved by this. But know this, when you stop reacting, when you stop giving them what they want, they won't stay calm. They'll escalate. So how do you stay anchored when their chaos gets louder? That's exactly what we'll explore in the next part. In the last section, we talked about refusing to react, choosing peace over pettiness, and how silence can be your loudest declaration of strength. But what happens when that silence actually starts working? Here's how you'll know you've stepped into a new level of authority. When your silence begins to unsettle the people who use to manipulate your reaction. When the enemy no longer gets the emotional response he used to get from you. No frustration, no defense, no chaos. He starts to panic. Why? Because now he knows the old tactics don't work anymore. You're no longer dancing to the rhythm of dysfunction. You've matured. You've grown. You've stepped into a deeper place of faith, and you've started to guard your peace like the sacred thing it is. So the next time someone disrespects you, tries to shake your calm, or drags you into their storm, pause and ask yourself, is this worth my peace? And if the honest answer is no, then give yourself permission to step back. Step aside. You don't have to argue. You don't have to prove anything. Pray, don't panic. Worship, don't worry. And most of all, keep moving forward. Because your peace is not up for negotiation. It's not a gift you give to people to earn their validation. It's not something you trade for attention or approval. Your peace is a divine inheritance. And when you protect it, God moves through it. He'll speak through your stillness. He'll fight for you in ways your words never could. Never forget this. Some people only feel powerful when they see you fall apart. They thrive on your reaction because your emotional energy fuels their dysfunction. Don't hand them that power. Stand still. Stay calm. Let the storm pass while you remain anchored in the one who calms every wave. You don't need to raise your voice to be respected. You don't have to yell to be heard. But you do need to be clear, firm, and faithful when it comes to your boundaries. Some people will only stop crossing the line when they finally see that a line actually exists. That's where your strength needs to show. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in quiet, unwavering conviction that says, I love you, but I love me too. There's a reason Scripture tells us to guard our hearts. It's not because we're meant to be cold. It's because we're meant to be careful, intentional about who and what we allow to live there. So how do you guard your heart without shutting it down? We'll dive into that in the next part. In the last part, we talked about the power of boundaries, how they protect your peace and define your worth. But what does it look like to actually enforce those boundaries when people push back? Because here's the truth. When someone consistently disrespects you and you keep giving them access to your emotions, your time, and your trust, you're not extending grace. You're opening the door to more pain. And let's be clear, God never asked you to do that. Yes, you're called to forgive. Yes, you're called to love. But nowhere did he call you to keep placing your heart in the hands of someone who keeps dropping it. Forgive them? Absolutely. Love them? Always. Let them keep hurting you? Never. Boundaries are not brick walls designed to shut people out. They're doors with locks. And you get to decide who holds the key. When you don't set boundaries, people will assume you have none. And when you finally do start setting them, don't be surprised if the ones who benefited from your lack of boundaries are the first to complain. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you're being distant. They'll say you're being cold or difficult. But that discomfort they're feeling, that pushback you're receiving, that's not your guilt to carry. That's simply the sound of control being lost. Because people who genuinely love you, they may not agree with your boundaries at first, but they'll learn to respect them. The only ones who will treat your boundaries like betrayal are the ones who use your lack of them to manipulate or take advantage of you. And when that happens, don't shrink to make them feel comfortable. Don't explain away your standards just to keep the peace. Because the people who are committed to misunderstanding, you will never hear your heart anyway. There's something holy about saying no. There's something powerful about walking away from dysfunction and choosing alignment instead. There's a strength that rises when you stop chasing peace and start enforcing it. But how do you keep that strength when your heart still feels heavy? Let's talk about that in the next part. In the last section, we talked about the power of saying no about walking away from chaos and enforcing peace through boundaries. But let's be clear, enforcing boundaries doesn't mean becoming harsh or bitter. This isn't about cutting people off with a hardened heart. It's about saying with quiet conviction, I will no longer participate in conversations that dishonor my spirit. I will no longer tolerate behaviors that leave me drained. And I will no longer apologize for protecting the life and peace that God has entrusted to me. You don't need to be rude to be firm. You don't have to shout to be clear. And you certainly don't have to justify your boundaries to people who never intended to honor them in the first place. If someone constantly needs you to explain why yelling at you, manipulating you, or ignoring you is a problem, they're not looking for understanding. They're looking for permission to keep doing it. And let's be honest, your silence has already given them that permission for far too long. But there's a shift that happens when you start seeing your worth the way your Creator does. Look at the example of Jesus. He never chased after people who chose to walk away. He didn't beg the Pharisees to change their minds. He didn't force himself into spaces where love and truth weren't welcome. What did he do? He spoke truth. He stood tall. And when the environment no longer honored what he carried, he left. That wasn't weakness. That was wisdom. That was spiritual maturity, anchored in identity, not insecurity. And that's what we're called to. Because no matter how much faith you have, if you keep standing in spaces that dishonor your soul, even your strongest prayers will eventually feel heavy. If every conversation leaves you exhausted, if every interaction makes you feel unseen, if your presence is consistently met with resistance or disregard, that's not something you're meant to endure endlessly. That's something you may need to step back from with wisdom, not resentment. Because here's the hard truth. If you keep pouring into places that keep wounding you, you'll eventually run dry. So what do you do when stepping back feels painful but necessary? Let's walk through that together in the next part. In the previous part, we talked about stepping back from spaces that dishonor your soul, even when it's hard. But now we need to address something deeper. The idea that staying in pain somehow proves your faith. Let's be clear, God is not glorified in your exhaustion. He's not impressed by how long you can endure a toxic environment. He's not calling you to sacrifice your sanity, your peace, or your purpose just to prove that you're loyal. Loyalty to dysfunction is not faith. It's bondage. God doesn't ask for that kind of suffering. He calls you to peace, to wisdom, to discernment. And sometimes wisdom looks like saying, this far and no further. Yes, it might feel uncomfortable at first. Yes, when you finally stop shrinking yourself to fit into places that don't deserve you, you will feel the absence. But please, don't confuse that absence with loss. Sometimes peace feels like loneliness at first, but what it really is freedom. The kind of freedom that makes space for healing. The kind of freedom that clears the room for the right people to come into your life. People who won't just respect your boundaries, but will honor them. I know some of you have been afraid to draw the line. You've stayed silent, stayed small, because you're scared of who you might lose. But I need you to hear this. Anyone you lose by choosing to respect yourself was never truly meant to stay. You don't lose by setting boundaries. You lose when you let people walk all over the sacred ground of your soul. You lose when you abandon your values just to make someone else comfortable in their disrespect. So let today be the day you stop asking for room and start taking your place. Speak softly, but stand firm. You don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to beg for space. Claim it. You don't have to ask permission to matter. Walk like you already do. And when people test you, not out of curiosity, but out of disbelief, when they push just to see if you'll fold the way you used to, show them you won't. And what do you do when standing firm stirs up opposition, even from those closest to you? That's where we'll go in the next part. In the last part, we talked about drawing the line, how setting boundaries is an act of self-respect, not rebellion. Now, let's take it one step further. How you carry those boundaries speaks volumes. Let your silence be steady, not cold. Let your no be holy, not harsh. Let your boundaries be a clear reflection of your deep belief that God's peace is worth protecting at any cost. When someone disrespects you, especially someone close, your first instinct might be to try harder. You might feel tempted to prove your worth, earn their favor, or fix what's broken in them just to be seen. But let me tell you something plain and clear. You were never created to chase people who can't recognize your value. That's not love. That's not strength. That's bondage. And God didn't place you on this earth just to live in emotional chains forged by the opinions of the broken. There are people who will look directly at you, see the goodness in your heart, and still choose to disrespect you. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because their hearts are clouded by pride, fear, insecurity, or spiritual blindness. And the more you try to win them over, the more you will shrink. The more you'll doubt. The more you'll begin to forget who God says you are. But you're not here to convince anyone of your worth. You're here to walk in it. You're not here to beg for kindness, loyalty, or respect. You're here to set the standard, to reflect the love and dignity God placed within you. And when someone refuses to honor that standard, you move on, not in anger, but in alignment. Now, that doesn't mean walking around with ego or arrogance. It doesn't mean looking down on others or becoming emotionally closed off. No, but it does mean this. When someone shows you, again and again, that they cannot or will not honor what God has placed in you, you stop giving them front row seats to your life. You stop pouring your best into hands that only return your offering with rejection, criticism, or silence. You were created to be light, not to constantly dim yourself to fit into dark places. But what happens when walking away still feels heavy? That's what we'll dive into next. In the last part, we talked about reclaiming your space, stepping back from people who refuse to honor what God placed in you. Now let's talk about what it means to move forward with quiet, unwavering strength. Because at some point, you have to stop watering relationships that only grow thorns. You don't have to hate them. You don't need to curse them, expose them, or explain yourself to them. You simply need to shift your focus. Let your life speak. Let your consistency, your healing, your fruit be the answer. Because one of the most powerful ways to handle people who don't respect you is not by reacting, but by rising. Not in pride, in purpose, not with drama, with discipline. Do you know how powerful it is to keep building after they rejected you? To keep showing up for your assignment even after they wrote you off? To keep glowing even after they try to dim your light? That's what confuses the people who once try to break you. They thought their rejection would ruin you. They thought their silence would shrink you. But they didn't realize your value never came from their validation. It came from the one who formed you in the secret place. The one who called you worthy before anyone ever had the chance to approve or disapprove. And once you truly understand that, you stop reacting to every insult. You stop explaining every choice. You stop forcing yourself into places where you're only tolerated just to feel seen. Because now you know, if I have to shrink to fit in, it's not the right room. If I have to lose my peace to gain your attention, it's not worth the cost. Sometimes God allows disrespect, not to break you, but to clarify you, to wake you up, to reveal what's real and what's fake. Because maybe you were settling. Maybe you were giving sacred access to people who only saw you as common. And in His mercy, God stepped in, not to wound you, but to free you. You don't need to retaliate. You don't need revenge. But how do you carry that freedom without growing cold? That's exactly where we'll go next. In the last section, we talked about God using disrespect not to harm you, but to set you free. So now that you're no longer fighting for validation, here's what you must remember. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone who has already chosen not to see you. Trying to convince them is not strength. It's exhaustion disguised as effort. That kind of striving drains your energy. It steals your focus. It pulls your purpose into a battle it was never meant to fight. Instead, take that energy back. Give it to your healing. Give it to your calling. Pour it into the people who actually value your presence. And most importantly, return it to the one who saw your worth before your first breath. Now, I want to speak to the part of you that feels alone. That quiet part of your heart still whispering questions like, why do they treat me that way? What did I do wrong? Can I tell you something hard but healing? Some people can only treat you the way they treat themselves. If they're harsh with you, it's likely because they're even harsher with themselves. If they withhold love, it may be because they've never learned how to truly receive it. But here's the truth. That's not your fault. And it's not your assignment to fix it for them. You can love someone and still leave the space where your worth is being dismissed. You can forgive someone completely and still decide that your peace is too sacred to risk. You're not responsible for healing what someone else refuses to confront. You've already done more than enough. You've stayed longer than you should have. You've explained yourself more times than you can count. Now it's time to rise, not in bitterness, but in boldness. Time to step into the identity God gave you before the heartbreak, before the confusion, before the disrespect. Because that version of you, she doesn't need permission to shine. But how do you stay in that light when old voices keep trying to pull you back into the dark? That's what we'll unpack in the final part. In the last part, we affirmed your right to rise, not in bitterness, but in boldness. Now, let's step into the kind of strength that doesn't need applause to stand tall. Because this version of you, the healed, awakened, grounded version, doesn't need validation to feel valuable. She walks with quiet confidence, rooted in truth, unshaken by opinion, unbothered by rejection. You no longer have to lower your standards just to keep people from leaving. In fact, sometimes the leaving is the blessing. Sometimes it's not rejection, it's redirection. It's God clearing space, removing those who dishonor you so He can make room for those who will see you, honor you, and support your growth. So let Him do it. Don't chase. Don't plead. Don't shrink yourself to keep company that was never meant to go the full distance. Trust God. Keep walking, even if it means walking alone for a while. Keep growing, even if they never come back to apologize. Keep choosing purpose over popularity, because in the end, it won't matter who walked away. What will matter is who you became when they did. There's a kind of strength that doesn't need a spotlight. It doesn't show up in shouting matches, slammed doors, or loud declarations. It's not about winning the argument or proving the point. The most powerful strength often reveals itself in surrender. In those quiet moments when you fall to your knees and say, God, I release them. I release the offense. I release the fight. That's the strength that turns battles into breakthroughs. That's the strength that wins without wounding, that speaks without shouting, that shines without striving. Because when people don't respect you, the temptation is to defend, to prove, to make sure they understand who you are. But the truth? You don't need their recognition when you already have God's approval. So what does it look like to truly walk in that approval? That's exactly where we'll go next in the final part. In the last part, we explored the quiet power of walking in God's approval. Now, let's talk about what it means to truly surrender, not as weakness, but as the highest form of spiritual strength. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. Not out of apathy, not out of defeat, but out of trust, out of reverence for the one who sees more than you ever could. Sometimes the bravest response isn't a clapback or a well-crafted explanation. It's handing the entire situation to God and saying, "You deal with it, Lord. I trust you more than I trust my own voice." See, we often forget vengeance is not ours. Justice is not our job. The weight of fixing every offense, correcting every false impression, and mending every broken tie, that was never ours to carry. That burden belongs to God, and He carries it with a level of mercy, wisdom, and timing far beyond anything we could ever orchestrate. Because let's be honest, when we try to fix things ourselves, don't we often make it worse? We speak from emotion. We react out of pain. And instead of finding peace, we stir more confusion. But when we give it to God, truly give it to Him, He turns even our pain into purpose. He takes the ashes of disrespect and betrayal and creates something beautiful in His time. There's something sacred about stepping back, not in fear, not in shame, but in holy confidence, a deep knowing that says, I don't have to be understood by everyone. I don't need to defend my worth. I'm already seen, already chosen, already loved by the God who created me. That kind of surrender, it's not weakness. It's wisdom. It's the maturity that says, God, I trust you more than I trust the outcome I wanted. And yes, you'll be tested. People will provoke you. They'll misinterpret your silence. They'll misrepresent your heart. They'll call your peace weakness. Let them. Because while they're talking, God is working. While they're mocking, God is moving. While they're doubting, God is defending. And when you surrender the battle to Him, He doesn't just settle the conflict, He redeems it. In the last part, we leaned into the power of surrender, not to defeat, but to God's higher plan. Now, let's take that truth even deeper. Because here's what you need to remember. He elevates you through it. Some of the greatest breakthroughs in your life won't arrive after a shouting match or a dramatic turning point. They'll come quietly, right after a moment of still surrender. Not a surrender to disrespect, not a surrender to emotional exhaustion, but a holy surrender to the will of God. It's the kind of surrender that says, Lord, I won't spend another drop of energy trying to convince someone to value me. Instead, I'll invest every breath into becoming who you designed me to be. And that shift changes everything. Because sometimes surrender means praying for the very people who hurt you. Not because they deserve your prayer, but because you won't allow bitterness to take root in the garden of your soul. You pray, not to transform them, but to protect your peace. You pray, not from weakness, but from the strength it takes to release what you cannot fix. You're strong enough to love from a distance, strong enough to forgive with your will, even when your emotions aren't ready. And that's when you begin to walk in freedom. You trust that God can handle what your hands were never meant to carry, that He will deal with it, with wisdom, timing, and justice far beyond your reach. Because here's something many people forget. There are blessings attached to surrender. There are doors you can't force open no matter how hard you push. But they swing wide the moment you stop trying and start trusting. There are battles God is fully prepared to fight on your behalf. But He won't step in until you step back. And yes, surrender may feel like pain at first. It hurts to be disrespected. It stings to be ignored. It wounds the soul when kindness is met with cruelty. But pain has two paths. It can poison you, or it can purify you. The outcome? That's up to what you do with it. Now, in the next section, let's talk about how to turn that pain into something powerful. How to rise from it without letting it reshape who you are. Ready? Let's keep going. In the last section, we touched on the strength of surrender. How letting go doesn't weaken you, but frees you. Now, let's explore what happens when you truly give your pain to God. Because if you place it in His hands, He won't let it go to waste. He'll use it to refine you, to build endurance in your soul, to stretch your faith, to anchor your identity deeper than before. He'll teach you how to rise without rage, how to stand tall without stepping into strife, how to walk in calm confidence when everything around you is begging you to fight back. The world will shout, "Don't let them win. Prove your point." But heaven whispers, "Be still. Let me fight for you." And that stillness isn't weakness. It's power under control. It's the kind of strength that knows when to speak and when to stay silent, when to step forward and when to kneel in surrender. That's what it means to walk by faith. It's declaring, I will not be moved by their opinions. I will not be shaken by their behavior. I will not surrender my peace to chase an apology that may never come. And when you live like that, with your heart rooted in heaven, not in approval, You begin to experience something the world can't imitate: true freedom. Freedom from needing to be right. Freedom from needing to be heard. Freedom from the tight grip of insecurity that keeps asking, what will they think? You walk differently, with quiet boldness, with unshakable grace. You move with the kind of spiritual posture that says, I don't have to fight for what's already mine. I belong to God. My future is in His hands. My worth is already settled. So the next time someone disrespects you, pause. Take a deep breath, and instead of reacting, choose surrender. Not to them, but to Him. And just watch what unfolds when you stop forcing an outcome and start trusting the one who holds every outcome in His hand. Now, in the next part, we're going to talk about one of the hardest but most important things you can do: keeping your heart clean, especially when others try to contaminate it. Ready to go deeper? Let's continue. In the last part, we talked about surrender, about releasing what you can't control and letting God fight for you. But here's the next challenge. How do you keep your heart clean when life keeps trying to stain it? Because let's be honest, when someone disrespects you, bitterness feels like the easiest reaction. Their harsh words can harden you. Their silence can shake your self-worth. Their betrayal can leave a bruise so deep, you start believing you deserved it. But friend, hear me clearly. Guard your heart. Protect it, not just because it hurts, but because everything in your life flows from that sacred place. Your peace, your purpose, your direction. None of that flows from what they said or how they treated you. It flows from the condition of your heart before God. You see, disrespect doesn't only aim to diminish your confidence. It aims to contaminate your spirit. It comes disguised, planting small, subtle seeds. Seeds of resentment, seeds of vengeance, seeds of hopelessness. And if you're not intentional, those seeds grow. And suddenly, without even realizing it, you're no longer speaking from healing. You're speaking from hurt. You're no longer acting from clarity. You're reacting from pain. But that's not the life God designed for you. He didn't call you to live bound by bitterness. He called you to walk in freedom. Freedom that comes from guarding your inner world, no matter what happens in your outer one. There is something sacred about keeping your heart soft in a world that keeps trying to harden it. It takes deep strength to stay kind. It takes real faith to stay tender. It takes discipline to refuse to let someone else's brokenness become your identity. Because here's what happens if you don't guard it. You'll start mimicking the very behavior that wounded you. You'll find yourself gossiping like they did, withdrawing like they did, disrespecting like they did. And in that slow transformation, you don't just lose their respect. You risk losing your peace, your joy, your character. So don't let that happen. Don't let someone else's darkness become your blueprint. Just because they didn't know how to love you doesn't mean you stop loving. You keep your heart soft, not for them, but for you and for the God who lives in you. In the next part, we're going to talk about what it really means to love from a distance, how to set boundaries without losing your compassion. Let's keep going. In the last part, we talked about guarding your heart, about keeping it pure even when the world tries to harden it. Now, let's go a step further. What do you do when you've been deeply hurt, misjudged, or betrayed? Because here's the truth. Just because they fail to see your worth doesn't mean you forget it. Their failure to recognize your value doesn't change who you are or what you're called to do. Your identity? Not up for debate. Your purpose? Still intact. Your dignity? Still God-given and unshaken. Yes, they whispered about you behind your back. Yes, they misused your trust, took your kindness for weakness, and underestimated your worth. But now the question isn't about what they did. It's about what you'll do next. Will you mirror their behavior or rise above it? Will you let their coldness freeze your heart? Or will you allow God to keep it clean and whole? This is where the true battle lies. Not in clapping back, not in bitter silence, but in the quiet decision to stay pure when everything in you wants to grow cold. Because strength doesn't always look like shouting louder. Sometimes it looks like standing still, refusing to let the offense bury your joy. And hear me, just because you're hurt doesn't mean you have to hate. Just because you were wrong doesn't mean you must seek revenge. That's the trap. That's the enemy's strategy. A cycle of offense, bitterness, and retaliation that keeps your soul bound and your spirit drained. But God has a higher path. It's not the easiest. It's not the most celebrated. But it's the only one that leads to freedom. The kind of peace that the world can't give and pain can't take away. When you choose to keep your heart clean, you disarm darkness. You stop the lies in their tracks. You draw a holy line and say, yes, I was wounded, but I will not let that wound define me. Yes, pain touched me, but it will not shape who I become. And that is power. Not the kind that gets applause from people, but the kind that makes heaven stand to its feet. Now stay with me, because in the next part, we'll explore what it looks like to move forward. Not with bitterness in your hands, but with boldness in your heart. When you've been hurt, it's natural to want others to feel the weight of what they did. But remember what we explored just before. True strength isn't in retaliation, it's in surrender. And part of that surrender means refusing to let pain dictate your next step. You don't need to make them feel what you felt. You don't need to plan your comeback or rehearse the pain. You simply need to let God handle what you can't. He sees every word spoken in secret, every action done in the shadows. And he reminds us, vengeance is mine, I will repay. That's not a threat. It's a promise from a just and holy God. So instead of holding on to the bitterness, you get to lay it down. You get to walk away, not with your fists clenched, but with your spirit free. Choose peace, even when you feel justified in your anger. Choose compassion, even when revenge seems easier. Choose healing, even when staying hurt feels more familiar. Now hear this clearly. Keeping your heart clean doesn't mean you deny what happened. It means you surrender the pain. You place it into the hands of the only one who can turn ashes into beauty, wounds into wisdom. And when you do that, when you truly surrender, something changes. You stop needing an apology to move forward. You stop letting the past be louder than your purpose. You walk lighter, stronger, anchored in grace. Because a clean heart becomes a vessel, not just for God's peace, but for his power. It's how he flows through you, lifts you, and protects you. So the next time disrespect comes knocking, don't just protect your image, guard your heart. Don't just leave the situation, invite God in. Because at the end of the day, the condition of your heart will always determine the direction of your life. And when your heart is anchored in truth, no weapon formed against you will prosper. Not because it isn't real, but because it can't reach what God has already sealed. Let them say what they want. Let them move how they will. But as for you, keep your heart clean, wishing you strength, peace, and clarity on your journey. And don't forget, subscribe to Mindset Daily for more messages that protect your peace and elevate your purpose. Stay blessed and take care.